Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Still Standing podcast, hosted by Daniela Galdi, the founder of Still Standing Together, a support and empowerment organization that helps you get back on your feet. The Still Standing podcast offers you interviews, guidance, and solutions through everyday struggles and mental health improvement.
Welcome to a new episode of the Still Standing podcast. Today we're talking with Alexandra Fisher, who is a licensed social worker in both Pennsylvania and New York. She grew up in New York on the beach and moved to Philly in August of 2019. She has been working as a social worker since 2014 and has been licensed since 2016. And in the last 6 years, she has worked in a variety of settings, including schools, outpatient mental health, and outpatient substance abuse clinics. She works with individuals and families as well as facilitating groups. Alex's experience with community outreach and organizing has led her to learn more about program development and implementation. She currently is working full-time in case management and crisis intervention for a community agency in Bryn Mawr in Pennsylvania. That's not all, though, that Alex does to give back to her community. She also runs a choice food pantry, as well as works to provide individual and family therapy remotely. She uses a variety of interventions in her approach to working with anyone, but believes in a person-centered, strengths-based approach, no matter what the circumstances are. Alex is also married to her high school sweetheart and mentions, but also a lot of work. And she's a full-time dog mom of 2 very fun, lovable dogs, and she enjoys reading, learning, exercising, and spending time with friends and family, and being outside when it's sunny. We definitely want you to connect with Alex because we're going to be talking about mood disorders today, and she's joining us to give a brief introduction into each of the common types of illnesses associated with mental illnesses, specifically to mood disorders. So if you enjoy what you hear and feel as though you want to connect with Alex, and if you like pictures of dogs and information about unlearning racism, both yours and hers, you can follow her on Instagram, which will be in our description for this episode. Hi, Alex. I'm so happy we're doing this.
Hi, me too.
So we have known each other now, I guess, for a few months, I'd say, and but recently, I just want our listeners to know how supportive you've been, especially during everything going on in our world with efforts to end social injustice and to bring about change for the Black community, people of color, and the initiatives and the education you put out there and the all the efforts that you do have helped, especially in Still Standing with the events that we recently had. I just have to thank you because you've been a huge support for that, for me especially.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I have to say that I can't take any actual credit because the stuff that I'm sharing is not original content. It's all it's all other people, but it's important to me to uplift things that are important, and so I'm glad that is having meaningful impact.
It definitely is. And it's so, I was thinking about it the other day, and it really just embodies the whole idea of, and my mission with Still Standing Together and being there to support one another and use each other as resources. So it was really awesome that we were able to get started talking about that. And that actually led to us talking about having you on to do this episode about the, common mood disorders and mental illness and start to break it down, because I had mentioned to you that I wanted to start to go back to the basics and make sure that anyone who's searching a podcast or anyone who's searching on the internet or anyone who just needs to hear more about what types of mental illnesses are out there and how can we treat them, I want to make sure we're that resource. So it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, it really did. But I am so glad to be a part of this community and to know you and have, that support. It's really been wonderful.
Oh, I'm so glad. I love you. So now that we've professed our love for each other, what I want to definitely do is I've already let our listeners know about your bio, and
Mhm.
I've read to them a little bit about you, but definitely we want to hear from you. So just share a little bit about yourself and how you became a social worker and working in the wellness as a wellness professional.
So, a little bit about me. I think probably the most important thing about me is that I have two dogs who are here with me today. So, if you hear barking, I apologize. Um, so that's probably the most like defining thing is dog mom. Other than that, I am a white woman. I am married to my high school sweetheart. I think you mentioned that. That is a whole lot of work. Uh, I am a person who lives with an anxiety disorder. I'm a person who lives with more than one anxiety disorder. So I have generalized anxiety disorder, but I also have panic disorder. My panic disorder is much more under control right now than it was even a year ago, even definitely than it was 2 years ago. I have a bachelor's degree in English, and then I graduated and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to work in retail for a little while and just get some like life skills, some money. Like I wasn't really qualified to do anything. I didn't really like want to go into publishing, but I didn't want to be a teacher. Like I didn't really know what I wanted. So I went into retail and then I got into management, and then I was a manager. I was a store manager for like 6 years, I guess. And I worked in a variety of stores and settings with a lot of different people. And the whole time I was like, this is nice. I like management, but I didn't want to work in retail anymore. I wanted to do work that felt like meaningful and impactful. So I was working in retail. I was feeling like I didn't really feel like I was connected to the work. It didn't feel like meaningful soul work. So I spoke to like literally everyone. I spoke to my mom. I spoke to my boyfriend at the time. I spoke to all my friends. And I was like, I think I want to go into social work. I think I want to be a therapist. And then right after college, so it was like right in the beginning of my time in retail, a friend of mine came out as trans. And at the time, that was like not really a topic of conversation in the same way that it is today. And there were no resources for him. And it was extremely difficult, and he needed medical attention, and he was constantly getting spoken down to or spoken about like he wasn't there or whatever. It was terrible. And then right around the time that I applied to graduate school, shortly before, he was trying to get top surgery and was having a really hard time with that. And I was like, you know what, this is it. Like, I want to be a person who opens doors for people. Like, I want to be a person who is there for people who are marginalized. I want to be somebody who supports communities that don't ever get any support. And so I applied to graduate school. I only applied to one, and I said, you know what, if I get into this school, it's the universe telling me that this is what I'm supposed to do. And I got in. And so since then, I've had like one affirming experience after another that has really like let me know that this was like the right decision for me. I've mostly worked for nonprofits in agencies. So my history with social work is doing outpatient substance abuse, but also outpatient mental health. I've never done any private practice, but I do work with an agency now. I think that you probably spoke about that in my bio, where I am doing like individual, family, couples counseling, stuff like that, like just outpatient supportive counseling, like not anything.
It's
Really.
incredible. It's really incredible how you are living your, it's going to sound cliche, but you are living your purpose and your calling and what you set out to do. It gives me chills when I hear you talk about it, because just the fact that everything you do in your work, even if it is as simple as like a social post or something like that, and just from us talking, you are so inclusive, and it is definitely what we need, and you've been this way, but especially right now. And it gives me chills to hear you talk about that. What I love that you said, Alex, is when you were searching, where's that meaningful work? And I think it's so common. I've done this. I still do it. I think a lot of other people I've talked to, they do it. And it's like you go to other people to find these answers.
Yes.
And so it's just incredible to see going from that state of quote unquote confusion and finding the direction now that is so aligned with who you are.
Yeah, I think that I am a person, and I think this is important, and we'll talk about this more. I think that getting to know how you process information is like one of the most important things that you can do for yourself. I am a verbal processor. You can ask my sister, you can ask my mother, you can ask my husband, you can ask my best friends. Everyone's exhausted listening to me process information literally all of the time. I've been feeling feelings since 1989 and feeling them hard. So
that's a great way to put it. Feeling the feelings.
feeling all the feelings and processing all the information. And so I'm a verbal processor. I need to talk about it. It's the only way that I can get things out of my head and get them to make sense.
So would you say that's your process of processing? Are there other types of processing?
So yeah, so plenty of people take in information in different ways. I have lots of friends who are hands-on processors, so they're not really able to understand something until they have experienced it, which is not to say that they don't have empathy, but just that like for themselves, it's like hard to understand until you've gotten your hands dirty and gotten into the work. Other people write, and that's how they process things. So they keep journals. I know you've mentioned that before, that you were a journal keeper.
I am, but I have to say I'm curious to hear all these different ways of processing, because I journal, but it does not come easily to me. But I know it helps me. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if it's my way. It helps me to process. I don't know if it would be my main way. But keep going. I don't want to cut you off because I feel like there are probably different ways too.
Well, so there's people process things by listening, right? And just hearing other people's experiences and then like comparing that to the thoughts that they're having in their head. Journaling is great. I'm trying to think of like other like more common things. I hear all different stuff, but like any kinds of ways that you can like get into meditations, that's different for everybody, and that's a larger conversation as well. And I think, by the way, that what worked for you 5 years ago is not going to work for you now. When I was in high school, I kept a journal that I was obsessed with, and now when I sit down to journal, I'm like, I don't know, like I have nothing to write, and when I try to write, it feels like stunted and forced, and nothing really like meaningful comes out. But I can sit and have a conversation with you for like 9 hours and have really profound aha moments that feel really organic and good. So it's totally, you got to go with the flow.
Oh, that's awesome. And it's so relevant to what we're going to talk about today with the mood disorders and just hearing about explanations of what they are. And, I wanted to preface this with, you and I have talked about what we're going to talk about in this episode. And we both prefaced it with, not to self-diagnose, but to be aware of what you're feeling and that it might be time to get help from a professional. Seek ways that you can find some help for yourself. And you mentioned, and thank you for sharing that, by the way, that you suffer from anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder. I'm in that club as well. Generalized anxiety disorder, and panic attacks. I am also in that club, which I'm bringing up because you mentioned about how we're evolving and the ways that we process evolve with us. And sometimes some of our illnesses are more elevated than others at times. Like I don't have my panic attacks as much, which is really interesting because my panic attacks are based on death. And right now there's a pandemic happening and death is more common, so it's good for people to know that like they're not doing the wrong thing, that it's evolving and it's okay if what used to work isn't working anymore. I also have depression, so we throw that in there too. And it's not something to laugh about, but I'm comfortable talking about it now at this point. And that is the goal, is to get people talking. So I'm really happy you're a verbal processor. Because that's
my husband is not.
Oh, isn't that ironic?
Yeah, right. He's always like, oh my God. Anyway.
I love that explanation of your story and your background of how you got here. It definitely shows that there was a pivotal moment of bringing more meaning and wanting to help more people. And so as we get into this topic of trying to help people better understand mental illness. We are going to focus on mood disorders. And I really would just kind of love to like dive into it because there's a lot of information, right?
There's a lot of information. So first I want to just, I want to just sort of start with a disclaimer. When we talk about mood disorders and diagnosing, okay, we're diagnosing basically for the purposes of insurance. Otherwise, there's not really a reason to diagnose someone necessarily, particularly if we're talking about like anxiety or depression. So if you're seeing a therapist or you're going somewhere for medication or whatever, they're going to need a code, and we're going to talk about the DSM in a minute. They're going to need a code. It comes out of the DSM, and it's really for the purposes of insurance. So just because you are a person who has been diagnosed with a mental health issue, whatever it is, right? That does not define you. It is only a part of you, and it is only a part of you that is usable for insurance so that people can make money. There's no, like, this is not your defining characteristics. So I am a person who lives with generalized anxiety disorder, and I'm comfortable with that diagnosis. That fits in with this, you know, with my symptoms and the story I'm telling myself and all of that. So that's okay. But I meet with plenty of people who are like, well, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that. Or I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder and that makes me really upset or confused because they never spoke to a mental health professional about what that diagnosis actually means and means for them. And so like you can claim it, you can not claim it. You can just own your symptoms and work on decreasing your symptoms if you want to, or decreasing the frequency of them. There's not like you don't have to own it if you don't want to, and it's not meaningful in that way.
And I'm going to add to that because I think there's another really importance about us doing this and talking about this right now is also other people putting it on you. Like I did have somebody the other day say to me, well, do you think you're bipolar? And I was like, I mean, I don't know, maybe some weeks, like I'm not sure. So I think it's just
most people don't understand what it means to be bipolar. And so they say to me, oh, she's so bipolar. And when I ask clarifying questions about that, they just mean she's moody. That's not what it means to be bipolar. And you can own that or not own that or whatever. Like if there's one thing that anybody takes away from this conversation that we're having today, it would be to own your story however you want it. You are the expert of your own existence. You are the expert of your own experience. And that's it. Like nobody else can really tell you anything. You can take suggestions or options, but just because something is presented to you does not mean you have to take it.
Thank you. Thank you for putting that out there. I seriously love your approach, and you'll hear me sing your praises throughout this because I just am so glad that you are here with us doing this. So you mentioned DSM. Am I saying that correctly?
Let's talk about that.
Yeah,
So
let's hear this.
So the DSM is a diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders. We are currently in the 5th edition. Now there is sort of a long, boring history about it, but just know that it's put together by a board of doctors. It's the American Psychiatric Association, the APA. And it's often quite problematic. So there are a lot of things that a lot of mental health providers who go by the DSM because we have to will say like, but I don't necessarily agree with that. But it is also a helpful tool. So somebody comes in. So let's talk about how diagnosing happens, if that's okay. Basically, everyone uses it because it is generally widely accepted and that's what insurance accepts. Okay, so I want to talk about how somebody would get diagnosed. So we're going to backtrack to like getting to a doctor or a mental health provider, but you got there. You're going to share your symptoms. Now the DSM, I'm going to just flip to generalized anxiety because it's a common one. So now the DSM has it broken up. You're going to read your you're going to say your symptoms to somebody. You're going to say like, okay, I'm really irritated all the time. I'm having trouble staying focused. I am worried about things that like are not even happening. I'm like caught up in my head. I'm feeling really like my heart is beating really fast, right? So you're going to say all those things. I'm having weird like leg tension, something like that, right? You're going to say all those things. So now your mental health provider is going to take your list of symptoms and they're going to take it to the DSM, which has broken it down into a, like, it's numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with all different things. Now, and they break down how a professional can diagnose. Okay. So for example, so it's the diagnostic criteria. So the diagnostic criteria for generalized anxiety disorder is A, excessive anxiety and worry. I'm going to sort of paraphrase these. B, the individual finds it difficult to control the worry. C, the anxiety and worry are associated with 3 or more of the following six symptoms. So then they list 6 symptoms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Restlessness, feeling keyed up, being easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating or your mind going blank, irritability, muscle tension, sleep disturbance. And then there's like a few more. So you'll go through, and if generally speaking you fit that criteria, they're going to put you in there.
Okay, now I have quick questions, and I love this because I feel like it's like a magician revealing a secret. Is there a secret? So I my one question to that is, they sound very common.
They are.
What constitutes it as having it to the next level as a mental illness?
So that's a good question. So the DSM is going to say one thing and I'm going to say whatever I want, which is that anytime that you as an individual person are having trouble, then it is a problem and then it is a mental illness. And so I think that we need to start thinking about mental health in the same way that we think about physical health, whereas like you could have a little cold, you know, like you don't have to have like full-blown flu to be ill for a short period of time. You don't have, or you could be sick for a long period of time with a chronic health condition. Like these things are sometimes dependent on a situation. You had a really horrible breakup. You lost a job. Somebody that you love passed away or got terminally ill or something horrible happened. You were in a car accident. You came home from serving your country overseas. You have been marginalized and no one's ever listened to you, or, you know, you've lived through any number of traumas or difficult circumstances or adversities. And sometimes it's just a chemical disorder, and, you know, and we can talk about that also, but it's not prescriptive. Mental health is not prescriptive. So if you are finding that you're struggling in some way, shape, or form, you're uncomfortable in some way, shape, or form, that's when something's up. That's your red flag.
It's a great explanation. Okay, so now continue on to what you were saying. Can we get into the breakdown of some of these disorders?
It's also important to know that in a lot of cases, so for you, you said you have generalized anxiety disorder and you also have depression. So now for you, what would happen is you're going to give a whole list of symptoms that seem to not make sense together. I have no energy. I have a ton of energy. I can't sleep. I sleep all the time. I can't eat. I eat all the time. You know, you're going to sound like nothing makes any sense, because depression and anxiety feel like they shouldn't go hand in hand, but they often do. If your practitioner is a good diagnostician, they're going to do what's called a differential diagnosis, meaning, okay, I'm assessing Daniela for the following things: anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, depression, and let's just say bipolar disorder, because you mentioned it before. So you would look at all of the different criteria and you would think about all of the people that you know who have those symptoms and those diagnoses, and you would make what's called a differential diagnosis. So you would rule out, right? So you would assess for bipolar disorder. Have you ever had mania? No, you've never had mania, not bipolar. That probably depressed and anxious.
And then for our listeners, just to make sure we're on the same page with everyone, this is after you've already gotten yourself to a
Correct.
Professional. Okay.
Yes, don't do this at home.
Okay. Okay.
Don't do this at home. And if what you're concerned about, for some people, it is really helpful to have a label, and to say, like, I am a person who has borderline personality disorder. I'm a person who has bipolar disorder, whatever. If that's important to you, talk to your practitioner about it and say to them, like, I really want to talk about my diagnosis. I really want to talk about what this means. I really want to talk about what it says in the DSM, and go through it with somebody who has a working understanding of what it is, as opposed to just like doing a Google search, which I do not recommend, and just sort of like winging it, because that's an easy way to get confused.
I feel like the equivalent of, like, if a doctor is to say to you, like, okay, don't WebMD that, or like,
right.
come to see a professional.
Exactly. And that's not to say, by the way, that you shouldn't do your own research. I think that once you've had a conversation with a professional, you've asked a zillion questions, you talk to maybe another professional, you get a third opinion, you read some books, whatever. I think taking control over your own mental health and your own physical health, any of your health, is the most important thing that you can do. You should always be your own advocate. So yeah, that's not to say don't get educated. It just means don't WebMD it if you're not like 100% sure what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So what are some, so I have listed down here, and you can tell me more on this as the common, as common mood disorders. I have anxiety, and then I did want to touch on, if we could, separation anxiety as maybe like a level of, or sub level of anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, substance-induced mood disorder, especially because I know that is your, one of your specialties, seasonal affective disorder, which is SAD for anybody listening, if you've ever heard someone talk about having SAD, and panic attacks.
Yes.
So do you want to add to that list, or?
I do. I want to add one more, not more common, but if you are experiencing symptoms and you think that you're bipolar, it is also possible that you maybe have what's called a borderline personality disorder, which affects your moods, but again, this is where the DSM can be problematic, because a borderline personality disorder affects your moods. It's literally like just about being mood disordered, but it doesn't count as a typical mood disorder because it gets classified as a personality disorder. We can talk about that more, but I do want to circle back to generalized anxiety disorder and that stuff first because it's more common. So generalized anxiety disorder and depression are really common. I don't even know the numbers. They're staggering. We live in a society that does not value health and wellness. That we say we do, but we don't. Everything is wrapped up in productivity, and that's pretty much it. So if you're not being productive, you're not worthy of anything, which is not true. Because of that, most people develop either panic in some way, shape, or form, or depression. It's just kind of the way that things are set up for us, unfortunately.
Let's give our listeners 3 common symptoms.
For anxiety and depression, they're going to overlap a lot, our common symptoms. We're talking about irritability. We're talking about not sleeping or sleeping too much. We're talking about not eating or eating too much. Again, I had mentioned the diagnostic criteria for anxiety, for generalized anxiety disorder. I should also mention that so if we're talking about diagnosing for the DSM, we're also talking about time. So if you say that you've been experiencing, you've been thinking a lot and you've been nervous for the last 2 weeks, I'm going to say, okay, well, we should talk about those symptoms, but you probably don't meet the criteria, again, DSM, for a generalized anxiety disorder. So for a generalized anxiety disorder, you are looking at excessive anxiety and worry occurring more days than not for at least 6 months. A lot of it is about time. Okay. So if you're like noticing that you're feeling really keyed up, you are having a lot of nervous energy in your arms and legs specifically, you're nauseous more frequently, you're getting like stomach cramps, headaches, you're getting any kind of like excessive muscle tension, and then you're also in your head a lot, you're thinking about things that haven't happened or probably aren't going to happen, you're perseverating, meaning you're getting stuck on like this one idea of, let's say, death. You mentioned that's a common one. Gaining weight, losing weight.
It's all really affected. It sounds like every element is affected for, as you said, that period of time.
Right. And that can come on really at any time. So some people, I've always been a nervous person. I've just always been an anxious person. I was an anxious kid. It's gotten worse at points and better at points, but that's just like how I am. Other people, my husband has no stress response at all. Like his brain just doesn't have an amygdala, I guess.
Well, can we get into real quick, Alex, about the chemicals, if you can briefly touch on that? Because I think that's a very relevant that you're mentioning that, the comparison of you and your husband, because there are people that'll look at it and be like, wow, and you never feel this way about that? And then I'm like, they're like, no. And I'm like,
what is that like?
what is that? Yes. And I'm like, what is that like? And
You're
I'm
not
actually
trapped in your own brain? How?
exactly.
Yeah.
And I've had that, I've had this conversation with therapists. I've had this conversation with my physician where I've said, not everyone thinks like that. And they've been like, yes, you have a chemical imbalance happening. So explain that for us, please.
So first I want to start with like talking a little bit about your body's stress response, because I think that that's important. And I think a lot of people don't understand what is physiologically happening to them when they are experiencing stress and panic of any kind, even if it's a small amount. Your amygdala is a part of your brain that is purely serves as I call it your body's fire alarm. It purely serves as like functioning for your body's stress response. That's its only job. And it has not evolved in the entirety of human existence. So a zillion years ago, when we were all cave people, you would leave your cave to go eat a rabbit, right? And you go to eat your rabbit and you're like hunting your rabbit and you look up and there's a saber-toothed tiger. Now your body kicks in its chemicals, its stress response, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And you're going to start to feel fight or flight. There's actually like 5 of them. That's a whole other thing. Okay, so you're going to start to feel fight or flight, meaning a lot of the time when you're experiencing anxiety, what are some like common, like if you're starting to feel like a panic attack coming on, what are some common things that happen in your body?
My heart races.
Yeah, okay. So you start to have like your cortisol increases and your adrenaline increases, and so your heart starts to race. Do your palms get sweaty?
Mine do not, but I get more, I
God.
feel like yours get sweaty. See, I never realized that. Mine's more of like a head, like I'll feel dizzy.
Okay, so the blood and like oxygen has rushed out of your head, which is why you feel dizzy sort of suddenly. Do you get excessive energy in your arms and legs? Do you pace?
No, mm-hmm.
Okay, so because you have excessive energy in your legs because your fight or flight instinct has kicked in. So you're either going to fight or run, which is why your body is sending blood and oxygen to your arms and legs.
So can I can relate this to, if anyone, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you've ever expressed, I'm feeling really antsy.
Yep.
Like there are times where I've been like, I'm just so antsy. And really it's like, I can't calm myself down.
Your body is in fight or flight. And so your stress response has kicked in. And so your chemicals are going and your arms and your legs are like, let's do this. But you're supposed to be like on a date at your job. Like it's always like the most inconvenient times, trying to go to sleep. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Now you're like pacing around your bedroom. Like, what am I doing? So that's your body's stress response kicking in. Okay. So that's your amygdala at play. Now, my question to people is always, if the amygdala serves as your brain's fire alarm, is your house on fire, or did you just burn something in the stove?
It's a great way to look at it.
It's not going to fix anything, but it helps to give us a little perspective. If you're able to say, you know what, I just burned a piece of toast. I screwed up this document at work and I'm not going to get fired and it's not that big a deal. It helps to bring things into perspective. It kicks your body out, not entirely, it kicks your body out of fight or flight into what's called rest and digest and calms you down a little bit. And we can talk more about that after. So that's the first thing. And I think that's really, really important for people to understand. The second thing is what's going on chemically. So chemically, we have a chemical imbalance, okay? So neurotransmitters, this is going to be difficult to do without a visual, but neurotransmitters, and also I'm not a scientist, so let's just disclaim that. I don't fully understand how neurotransmitters work, if I'm being honest, but there's like gray matter in between them, okay? So your neurotransmitters are the things that pass along messages and hormones and all the other things that your body needs to function. If you have 2 neurotransmitters lined up next to each other, there's like gray matter in between them. I don't know what that is, plasma or something. Let's say you have serotonin. That's a common one. Okay. And you've got 4 billion serotonins on the right side, and they have to pass through the plasma stuff to get over to the left side to move, and pass messages along. Okay. So now a serotonin molecule, it leaves the one side and it goes out into the plasma stuff, and for whatever reason it can't get absorbed into the other side. So it lives in like that gray area. And then what happens is it gets reabsorbed back onto where it came from. So now instead of having that balance because things are moving, it's gotten heavier on one side. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, so now if you take an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, like Prozac, Lexapro, that serves as sort of a prophylactic against that side to prevent the reuptake of that serotonin molecule, to give you a better chance of having it get reabsorbed on the correct side.
All so interesting. And that's a great visual, actually. My visual I've always used in my head is a pinball machine, but I don't think
No, but a pinball machine is sort of a similar idea, because you're looking at like little molecules essentially of things that have to go into the right places, and if they're not, then you have an imbalance, right? Like,
right.
then you lose. So like, I think we could make that work too. So some people have a chemical imbalance. Some chemical imbalances come on sort of randomly and quickly, and some people are born that way, and some people it comes on kind of slow. There's not necessarily rhyme or reason to that, but there is definitely a connection between being a person who is constantly stressed and anxious and like in your environment, and then your body gets used to having all of those excess hormones that are supposed to only be your body's stress response all the time.
Wow. Okay. I've never actually thought of it that way. That next
bodies love repetition. They love it.
That I know from dance.
Yep. So if you get the gears turning and the juices are flowing, they're going to just keep flowing because bodies are like, oh, this is what you want me to do. Great. But it's misunderstanding the input, and it's misunderstanding the reason that you're having the repetition. And so it's actually like doing more harm than good, but it doesn't recognize that that's happening.
And it seems like, it just, I get very fiery about it because it's such an important element. And I think back to my background in fitness and in dance, and it's like, these are things that people pay money and work on constantly every day for their physical body, because it's like, no, you're firing up the wrong area. You're feeling this pain. And
Yep.
and this is part of my mission too, Alex, and I'm sure it is somewhere in your realm as well, is like to make it aware that it should be worked on every day. These things need to be like, mental health needs attention, and it also needs to be made as important as taking care of our physical bodies, our physical being. I think
in the fitness world, it should be something that gets discussed as well, because I think fitness is really tied up in like diet culture, which is really bad. Want to tank your mental health? Like, let's talk about diet culture.
Well, that's a whole nother episode.
Well,
all right.
That's a whole other conversation. I mean, if you're wrapped up in a fitness world and you're now comparing yourself to all these other people who are, taller than you, fitter than you, have flatter stomachs, more toned arms. In my case, yours too, everyone's a foot and a half taller than us. If you're in that space and nobody's talking about mental health and they're only talking about your physical health, and even not even your physical health, but just the way that you look, that's going to tank you real quick.
Right. And then tie in injuries, which I am equating to like illnesses, mental illness, that's a whole nother layer. All right. So that was a great explanation. Thank you for that.
So sorry that we got off track, but let's talk about mood disorders.
Yes. So I was going to, no, I think it's perfect because we need to have the foundation. Everybody, myself included, and those who are listening, I want them to have that foundation. So if you can, run down and give us like a few more of those common red flags on these disorders.
With anxiety, there's different ways to have anxiety, and they present in different ways. So some people have crippling social anxiety. Crowds make them really nervous. Meeting new people makes them really nervous. Like they just, freeze up, forget their name, whatever. Certain people have phobias. So if you think I'm an anxious person in my regular life, you should see me in an elevator. It's a nightmare. I'm sweating profusely. I can't take a deep breath. I'm praying, I just fully panic, full panic. Some people have issues on public transportation. There's plenty of reasons to have a specific phobia. Plenty of people, you were talking about separation anxiety. So you get to know someone or something as your like emotional support, and then you get wrapped up in that if that person or that thing is not present for you, that you're not going to be able to regulate the way that you feel, and that is really nerve-wracking. So there's different ways to have anxiety. It's not always just a straightforward generalized anxiety disorder. For those of us who are the overthinkers, it's usually generalized anxiety disorder and then a specific phobia and then a panic disorder and then whatever. But not everybody has that. So
Okay. And now what about for depression?
So for depression, you're looking at a lot of similar attributes. I would say that the biggest one with depression, the biggest standout with depression is not being able to enjoy things that you were enjoying previously for long periods of time. So like you're out with your friends and you don't even want to communicate with them because you don't feel like anybody's gonna hear anything that you're saying anyway. And you're feeling very like hopeless or unheard. Even if your friends are the most supportive, wonderful people on earth, that's just like you're not gonna feel that way because you're experiencing depression at that point. It's like more negative symptoms. The use of negative symptoms is like the taking away of stuff. So like I'm not enjoying my social life anymore. I'm not enjoying my coping skills anymore. I'm not able to get out of bed. I'm not able to laugh as much or cry, or I'm crying all the time.
Yep. A common example I've given now that you're saying this in our support groups and workshops is I couldn't remember how to smile. And I wasn't joking when I said that to anyone. Like
Yep.
I could not, it felt foreign to me to smile. So, okay. So now that's again, a great explanation, Alex. So now going into the substance-induced mood disorder, that one I am not familiar with.
Yeah. So you wouldn't be, because it's not something that's talked about as often. If you are a substance user, okay, and by the way, there are such things as co-occurring disorders. We could be here for a really long time talking about that.
There's going to be a part 2 with you.
I think we're going to have to. So you can have a co-occurring disorder. Lots of people use substances because they are depressed. Lots of people use substances because they are anxious. Lots of people use substances because they are bipolar. We self-medicate all the time. If I told you how many hours of The Office I have watched during this pandemic, it's embarrassing. We self-medicate with different things at different times, right? And so for people who are really anxious, a lot of people use medical marijuana or CBD, right? For a lot of people who are bipolar, which we're going to talk about, they use all different kinds of substances. So they'll use marijuana to calm down. They'll use uppers to come up and get some energy. It's absolutely not uncommon. So for a substance-induced mood disorder, if you are using substances and your moods are affected by that, which they will be, that's sort of like the basics of it. We could talk about the diagnostic criteria for it if you want.
I feel that's a good explanation. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah. So around October, it starts to get dark early. And by November, by 4:30 in the afternoon, it is pitch black. And that's really hard for a lot of people, myself included. A lot of people it's sad, you said before, they get really heavily impacted by the change in the season and the lack of sunlight. It starts to feel really dark all the time. It starts to feel really gray. Things are dying. You're literally watching death like everywhere you go. Like trees are dying and things, and even though it's natural, it doesn't always feel natural. We're also getting a lot less vitamin D. Vitamin D is really good for us. It's really good for our moods. If you're getting a lot less vitamin D, then you're absorbing your other vitamins less. So if you're absorbing your other vitamins less, you're not going to feel good.
Now, with somebody who recognizes this, seeks professional help, how do you treat that?
With anything, awareness and intention are like the best things that you can give yourself. Oh, being aware and living intentionally with that awareness is the best thing that you can give yourself, and compassion. So some days are going to be great and some days you're not going to get out of bed, and some days you're going to eat really great and feel amazing, and other days you're going to eat cookie dough and not get out of your bed and feel like crap. It's just going to happen. With SAD, it's going to get better quicker because the season's going to change and you're going to start to feel better. It's cyclical, right? So just knowing that there's an end is often helpful for a lot of people. You can treat SAD with drugs, I guess. I don't recommend that unless it's like really extreme. In the same way that all mental health is not prescriptive, all solutions and suggestions are not prescriptive, and different stuff is accessible to different people. So some people get like a light lamp, like a UV light lamp.
I have one of those.
Yeah, and that's really helpful, right? It starts to like make you feel more hopeful. You're like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Some people go tanning, like literally go lay in a tanning bed. Some people just like dive much deeper into their therapy and like do a lot more like talk therapy and talk about like whatever their specific coping skills are going to be. I wouldn't say personally that I have SAD, but I 100% get SAD around like November. And so for me, getting up earlier in the morning is helpful because I get to see a little bit of that sun, and then taking breaks during the day to get outside and get sun, even if it's not like a lot of time, like 10 minutes every day feels right.
Now, those are great suggestions because I personally don't feel as though I'm affected. And it's interesting because November and December are like my favorite time of the year. I think because it's my birthday and things like that. So, but I do have friends that I know who are very much affected by the seasons. And so I think those are great suggestions because they're really manageable.
If you feel like you're reaching for a coping skill or a thing, like then it's not accessible to you right now. And that doesn't mean it won't be later. And it doesn't mean it wasn't in the past, but right now you got to just be where you're at.
So let's switch to panic attacks. And we did talk a bit about this when you mentioned about the stress response, things like that. But again, just an understanding for our listeners, panic attacks, what to recognize if you think you're having them, or if you think you're diagnosed.
Yeah. So a panic attack is going to look different for everyone. I don't want to start with usually after I say that, but usually you're going to either be like, oh, I have to throw up, or, oh, I'm having a heart attack. Like those are just like the most common things that I hear as a practitioner. And that's what happens to me. I'm like, oh, I have to throw up. I don't have to throw up. I'm just panicky. But that's because all of the blood and oxygen has left my stomach and moved into my arms and my legs, right? Because my stress response has kicked in really, really quickly. Some people, other common things that I've heard are that people tell me, oh, I just shut down.
That's an interesting one. I've never heard of that.
Yeah. So some people have told me like, oh, I was fine. And then all of a sudden I was not fine. And I immediately had to like lay down because my body was like quitting on me. And I've heard that like a good amount. So a panic disorder. So a panic disorder can be brought on by a trigger. So like you got in an elevator, somebody passed away, you are under an incredible amount of stress, you have been locked in your house for 4 months, there's any number of reasons that somebody would have a panic attack. They can also come on randomly. So you could be out in the supermarket, you could be home watching a movie, and then all of a sudden your chest gets really tight and your breath catches. So you're like having like a zillion thoughts, or your mind has gone completely blank. You're starting to feel your breath like really shallow in your chest or not at all. You're having pain. You've made up scenarios in your head that have not happened even ever. Panic attacks tend to feel more physical. A panic attack is like a manifestation of all of the things that you've been holding on to in your head a lot of the time.
I can attest to that. I have felt that so many times when I've had my panic attacks. And I'm glad that you mentioned about triggers, because when you put the work in, at least from my experience, when you put the work in, it does get easier to be able to recognize when you are at those triggers, or when those triggers are there, and to take yourself out of that situation. Or if you cannot take yourself out of that situation, recognize it's there and and manage it to where it does not full blown go into a panic attack?
Many people come into therapy because they want to lessen the severity and the frequency of their symptoms. And once you have a better understanding, again, it all comes back to like that understanding and that compassion with yourself, and that living intentionally, like being more intentional with your day, and how you spend your time and where you're investing your energy. And so like once you've started doing that, it's not even like getting to that breaking point. It's like, oh, my life feels more manageable. So I'm going to have less panic attacks because my life is more manageable, because I'm not as buried as I was at work, because I'm not, maintaining that circle of like toxic communication with my partner, because I'm, because I came out, because I advocated for myself, whatever it is, right? When you start to do those things and be more intentional and stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself and hold your boundaries and do all that, your day is going to feel better. Not every day. Some days are going to feel freaking horrible. I can't sugarcoat that. But a lot of your days are going to feel more manageable, and you're going to remember that like you've lived through all your bad days, and that you kicked ass on all your bad days, and you're going to be like, oh yeah, you know what? I did kick ass on all my bad days. So today's a bad day, and today's just going to suck, and then tomorrow the sun's going to rise and we're going to just try it again.
I love that. That is such a hopeful message, because that's the biggest thing. When you've lost that hope, it's hard to get it back. So I love hearing you say that.
For myself, tomorrow is another day. Today sucked. Today's just going to suck. Throw it out. Move on.
And again, you're giving yourself that compassion, which is, again, so important. So important. Okay. So last one that we have that we definitely want to talk about. I know you want to talk about as well. Touch on bipolar disorder.
Okay. So if there is one pet peeve that I have, it is that bipolar disorder has such a bad rap, because it is a serious diagnosis and it's an important diagnosis, and it's not, it's frustrating as a mental health professional to hear people willy-nilly be like, oh, she's so bipolar. No, she's not. She's just moody. Like, please stop doing that. Like, that really grinds my gears. So it's important that we understand what mania is, and then we can talk about how that relates to bipolar disorder. So the diagnostic criteria for a manic episode is a distinct period of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, and abnormally and persistently increased goal-directed activity or energy lasting at least 1 week and present most of the day, nearly every day. So I just said a lot of words, meaning that you are abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable is like the most important takeaway. So it's not part of your normal personality. You are persistent in that it's not like, oh, I have 15 minutes where I feel really keyed up. It's that it's happening all the time for about a week. And that you're elevated, expansive, or irritable. Elevated, like real high, blah, 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 right? Expansive can mean lots of stuff and is open to lots of interpretation, but delusions of grandeur. I'm the most beautiful woman in this room. Right now, I am the most beautiful woman in this room because I'm the only woman in this room. But, you walk into the Victoria's Secret fashion show and you're like, I'm the most beautiful woman in this room. Well, or irritable. So you have been really on edge and angry for about a week, which is not common and is not how you normally respond, and is maybe not for a particular reason. Okay, that's the first part. That's part A. Part B, during the period of mood disturbance and increased energy or activity, 3 or more of the following symptoms are present to a significant degree and represent a noticeable change from usual behavior. Again, this is abnormal and persistent. So inflated self-esteem or grandiosity, decreased need for sleep. So you're just like up all night because you're just like feeling creative and wired. More talkative than usual or pressure to keep talking. Flight of ideas or subjective experience that thoughts are racing. Distractibility. increase in goal-directed activity, either socially, at work or school, or sexually, or psychomotor agitation, meaning like that you're moving a lot. Your body is agitated and you have to keep moving. Excessive involvement in activities that have a high potential for painful consequences. So you are engaging in unrestrained buying sprees, sexual indiscretions, foolish business investments, spending money excessively, taking drugs excessively for reasons that you can't explain, getting on your motorcycle or someone else's motorcycle at 2:00 in the morning to drive 100 miles an hour wherever you want.
It's like very extreme levels of extreme. That's the key there.
Abnormal, persistent. The mood disturbance is sufficiently severe to cause marked impairment in social or occupational functioning. I didn't go to work today because I got on a plane and went to Kentucky for no reason at all. And when I got to Kentucky, I spent $4,000 on horse racing and I had sex with a stranger. And then I, didn't respond to any of my text messages because they were bothering me, and I haven't slept in 4 days.
Wow.
That's a very extreme.
Right. But not impossible.
But not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one, the episode is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance. So you didn't like smoke crack and then get on the airplane. You just woke up one day and you were like, I'm going to get on an airplane today. I feel like the most beautiful woman in the world today. And I am going to now talk for the next 5 days, and I'm going to go to Bloomingdale's and spend several $1,000s that I don't have on shoes. Right?
Right.
I decided I like photography, so I'm going to buy 15 cameras.
So it's not a spontaneity thing. It's that persistent is also the key.
Persistent, abnormal.
Okay.
So that's a manic episode. So some ways that people know they're having a manic episode is that they find themselves like talking a lot. They're engaging in things that are dangerous, that they cannot explain. So it's not like, oh, I'm a adrenaline junkie. It's like all of a sudden you're like in your late 20s and you're finding yourself, particularly in women, it will occur usually in your like late teens through your late 20s. So you're 25 and you all of a sudden are starting to notice that you're more irritable, that you are sleeping around more than you used to, and that you're taking drugs more than you used to. Well, if you're taking more drugs in your late 20s than you were in your early 20s, and you're having sex with more people that you don't necessarily want to be having sex with, and you can't explain those things, but you just feel like you should do them, you just wake up and should do them, you may want to talk to a doctor or a mental health professional about the fact that you might be bipolar.
Now, you said earlier sometimes that the disorders can almost in a sense come and go or possibly be circumstantial or is this something that is like that, or is it like it sticks with you?
That's a great question. So if you've had one manic episode, you fit the criteria as far as the DSM is concerned for bipolar disorder. Some people will have more than one. Some people, this is a chronic relapsing condition, and some people won't. So now the thing about bipolar, so now the reason that people say, oh, she's so bipolar, when what they mean is moody, is because when you're bipolar and you're having mania, you are up, 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 up. When you're bipolar and you're not having mania, you are really depressed. And you cannot get out of your bed, and you cannot answer your phone, and you are like totally not functional. And so it's important to understand that the bipolar is because for weeks at a time, you're going to be up, up, up. And then for weeks at a time, you're going to be down, down, down. So this is not, oh, she changes her mood on the fly. This is marked differences, polar opposites happening for weeks at a time.
Wow. And is that why it's related to a borderline personality disorder?
So borderline personality disorder is a whole other thing, but a borderline personality disorder, they do often occur together, but that doesn't mean that they will. And it doesn't mean that if you have one, you have the other. But a borderline personality disorder is often, it's a tricky thing to recognize. If you have the reason that they are commonly misdiagnosed is because of the engaging in like risky behaviors. So people who are borderline, or people who have borderline personalities, tend to use drugs frequently. They tend to sleep with more people more often. They tend to cut themselves. They tend to feel more suicidal. They tend to engage in more high-risk behaviors. If you are having a manic episode, you may also be doing those things. And so people will misdiagnose because they're not seeing the whole picture necessarily. And that's important to distinguish. A borderline personality disorder, I'm not going to go through the whole DSM, but a borderline personality disorder, the takeaways for me are when people talk about feeling really empty. A lot of people who have a borderline personality will say that they feel like a hole that they can't fill, and that they've tried it with drugs, with boyfriends, with cars, with, jobs, whatever. There's also an inability to form what they perceive to be long-lasting and impactful relationships. So you have a best friend, and then 2 weeks later you had a huge fight, and now you're not friends anymore. And then you have another best friend, and then 2 years goes by, and you have a fight, and now you're not friends anymore. That's not like the greatest example, but it's something that commonly comes up. But basically, yeah, you feel unstable in your interpersonal relationships.
Wow, that's heavy. That's all scary stuff. So I don't want to scare anyone listening by saying that, but I do, this is what this conversation is for, so that we can make people aware and recognize how important it is to find help in however many ways you can. So let's kind of come to full circle on help, the topic of help. And I would like you to touch on two things. If you have any suggestions on getting to a health provider, as you mentioned earlier, or AKA asking for help, like any suggestions on how to get that courage to do it, as well as for if somebody recognizes somebody else might need help, how to address that. You're very good at addressing things, Alex. So that's why I want our listeners to listen, or to be able to learn from you on that.
So the first thing is to say that these things that I'm describing make people feel very alone. I have a great support system personally, and I often feel very alone. If I'm having a depressive episode, if I'm like really in my head with my anxiety, if my panic is acting up, it feels very isolating, and your natural instinct will probably be to isolate. You're not alone. You're never alone. There are always people who are like you. No matter how rare your thing is, there's always people. Find a Facebook group and just read and just see what other people say. Find a Facebook group. You don't have to actively engage. Just recognize that you are not alone, that this is not just happening to you. That would be the first thing. The second thing is finding a practitioner is not the easiest thing in the world. And it's going to be frustrating. And when you don't have a lot of energy, it's going to feel nearly impossible. But recognizing that you need help, because we all need help at one point or another, for one thing or another, is the bravest and most wonderful thing that you could do for yourself or for another person. So giving yourself that space to say, you know what, I can't do this by myself, and I have to stop doing this by myself. Bravo, because that is the hardest freaking thing to do. And it's so brave. You are putting yourself in the ring, and only good things are going to come from there. Like, you can only go up, right? You've recognized it. You're gonna fight this fight because you're worth it, even if you don't 100% believe that you're worth it, and you're in the ring, and that's amazing. Finding a practitioner. So different things are going to be accessible to different people. I would say if you have insurance, going through insurance is great. Instagram is great.
We also have a list of resources on Still Standing Together. So any type of resources. I like that you said about social media, because that's a great way to find out about different platforms who are advocating for mental health and health and wellness.
Absolutely. If you're Black, Rachel Cargill, who is like the most incredible, has a therapy fund for women and girls who she just, it's all free and like donated. So she'll help pay for your therapy through this fund, which is incredible. So the resources exist. It's just a matter of like trying to find them. So reach out to a friend or a family member, reach out in a Facebook group, reach out to a therapist that you know, call a local mental health provider, like a community mental health provider, any nonprofit. One of the social workers is a person who cares enough to take an hour out of their life to help you find what you need. Like, I promise you that they exist. If they don't, call me. I'll do it. I have no issue finding people resources and getting people access to stuff. It's so important, and they exist. It's 100% there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to be kind and patient with yourself. When I was interviewing therapists for myself, it took me 5 months, 6 months, I would say, to find the right person. And I sent out a lot of emails, and I just was like, not getting the responses that I wanted from people. And then when I finally found my therapist, shout out Jen. Hey, Jen. When I finally found my therapist, I was like, like this is the one that I've been waiting for. And that relationship has been really great and helpful. So like, it does exist. You just have to be patient and give yourself that space.
And it is okay. It's important that you pointed that out, because it is okay to have, literally, I had a criteria for my therapist as well. And I remember going, yeah, absolutely. And I remember going in and saying, I need homework. Mm-hmm. I thrive off of the homework. It's what gets me, that was one of my things that was very important. Like, can we be on the same page with that? I need homework every week.
And it's great that you knew that. I think it's super important to go in with a list of things, with a list of questions. When I spoke to my therapist, I said to her, listen, I'm a therapist, and here are the things that I cannot stand. Do not ever give me a handout. I don't want a handout. There's people who love a handout. That's wonderful. I'm a verbal processor, right? I need to talk about it. I cannot sit in front of a handout. It makes me feel anxious, and then I can't talk. I need to just talk in circles until I've figured the thing out. And she was like, great, no problem.
Awesome. And I think it's helpful too for people who are feeling nervous about starting therapy. I can imagine it would help you to feel as though you are, in a sense, you are not this lost puppy going. You can actually be in control. If there's anything to be in control of it, you can be in control of finding a mutual relationship that works.
Your therapist works for you. I cannot stress that enough. I say this to my clients all the time. If I am talking too much, tell me to stop talking. If your therapist is not, if I'm doing something that somebody doesn't like, if I'm pushing too far or not enough, if I'm, talking about my dogs too much, which I frequently do, your therapist works for you. If this is not working for you, then there's no point in doing this. If you know too much or not enough about your therapist, if you're feeling some type of way and you don't feel safe or comfortable telling your therapist that, you have the wrong therapist. Your therapist should be open to any feedback that you have. They should be non-judgmental, and they should hold space. If they're not doing that, you have to let them know and have that conversation with them. And then if they're not able to make those changes, you have to stop having that relationship. Like, I cannot stress that enough. You are in control of your therapy. You are the master of your own destiny as far as your therapy is concerned. You must never give that up. That is the most important thing in the world. So when I go and speak to people, I say to people, do you know like what you like in a therapist? No. Okay. Do you think you want to talk to somebody older or younger? Does it matter? Does it matter if they're gay? Does it matter if they're, do you care about a gender or a gender identity? Do you care what color their skin is, right? How important is that to you? Do you want somebody who you can talk to about cultural stuff? So if you're Chinese, you might want to talk to another Chinese person or if you're Caribbean, you might want to talk to another Caribbean person. If you're I'm a Jewish person, right? My therapist is not a Jewish person. And so sometimes she says things and I'm like, if she was a Jew, I wouldn't have to explain this, right? And that can sometimes be frustrating. You might specifically want somebody who aligns with your own stuff. Ask for that. Find that. That exists.
Thank you for that empowering message of that and helping to make the process easier. And I seriously, I can't thank you enough for giving this understanding to all of our listeners, to myself, Alex, about how to recognize what's happening inside of our minds, inside of our bodies. And I definitely want you to come back for a part 2, because I know we have so much more to touch on. And I'm hoping that people will, send in some questions touching on this. And so we'll be able to address that in the next one. So I invite you back for another one.
I'd love to.
This is your community too. So, but I can't thank you enough, because that was such an empowering message, and you're helping to make it feel more safe to reach out, get help. So in tradition for this podcast, we always finish with an affirmation or some sort of positive self-talk for our listeners. So please enlighten us with something.
So I love "This too shall pass." I have it tattooed on my wrists, and it reminds me that every moment is just a moment and that it's going to pass, whether it's good or bad. So you got to just sort of like weather the storm, enjoy the moment, whatever, because it's gonna move, it's gonna pass. Your feelings are going to pass, right? So "This too shall pass" I really like, and that sits well with me. I also bought this book for myself called Heart Talk by Cleo Wade. She is the most lovely, uplifting, wonderful. I mean, I couldn't say enough things. I read these poems to my clients all the time. They're just like so good. They're so good.
I do. I love her too.
This book, like, I go back to this book over and over and over. I'm not a self-help person necessarily. And this doesn't feel like self-help. It just feels like really deeply, profoundly lovely poems and feedback. You could, I'm flipping through right now, and you could literally pick any one of them.
Do you have one for us?
Yeah. There's just so many good ones that it's like hard to pick, honestly. This is a good one. Okay. With eyes closed, I hold myself tightly and say, I am in this with you. I am here for you. No matter what happens, I will take care of you. Doing this is me choosing to be on my own team. Doing this is me learning to hold myself down through even a hurricane. Doing this is how I am able to live my life rather than let my life live me. Self-intimacy is self-care. Self-care is self-love.
I love it.
I could read this whole book and cry. They're just so good. Like every single one. This is a ringing endorsement. Cleo Wade, if you're out there, I love you, girl. I mean, she's just the best. They're like so good. When I was going through hard times, I was reading this book and just like weeping, and also posting them on my Instagram a lot.
All right, we all need this book, and we all need to cry it out.
We all need this book.
All right, thank you so much, Alex. Seriously, I'm so grateful for you. So thank you.
I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much for this time.